Good morning, everyone, and happy Monday. It is May 15th. We're halfway through the month, and I'm so glad to be here this morning with you. Thank you so much. We welcome you to this morning's session of the Deep Dive. I'm George Ratiu, Chief Economist for Keeping Current Matters. And today, I am really looking forward to chatting with you about some of the trends we're seeing in the spring market and what's driving some of those trends. In the meantime, while we're waiting for folks to sign in, do let us know where you're signing in from, and importantly, how you're feeling this morning. And I know on the West Coast is still a very nice and early morning. Hope things are well where you are, and the weather's cooperating. I know that El Nino is driving a lot of headlines this year, so something to keep an eye on. I know that California and some of the other West Coast states have seen a lot of rain this year. Hopefully the sun is beginning to shine more brightly. So with that, I want to welcome all of you again to this morning's deep dive. And let us, as the saying goes, dive right in. And what we are going to chat about this morning is, in a sense, what is happening in real estate markets. Specifically, we're going to take a look what's happening with homebuyer demand. And I say that because, as you know firsthand, we've spent really the last 8-9 months almost wringing our hands over the direction of the markets, right? We've seen mortgage rates shoot from 3% or so in January of last year to over 7% October, November. We've seen buyers get cold feet. We've seen homeowners ready to sell get cold feet. We've seen headlines announcing gloom and doom. And here we are, middle of May. And as the data keeps coming in, as the numbers keep coming in, and more importantly, as your experience, right, as we find out even from you, from conversations, from chats, your experience is highlighting a market that is confounding a lot of media expectations. So aptly, we named today's session Spring 2023 Homebuyer Traffic Trends. And the first slide I want to point to is a slide focused on showing time traffic of homebuyers. And what we're seeing here, we are seeing in the red bars clearly the impact of mortgage rates last year, right? So we saw as buyers found in many cases that the rates shot up so quickly, their ability to qualify for a mortgage began to taper off. We saw that traffic really decline, and it hit a low point in December of this last year. So a combination of rates, combination of holidays, seasonality, all of those came together and traffic declined. However, starting with January, we saw a real bump up in traffic. And what you see here are the first 3 months of the year, January, February, March. And what you see with each successive month, homeowners have been seeing more traffic at their open houses. And what's interesting to see here is that, yes, traffic is not as high it was last March, but it really has been picking up momentum. And why this is relevant to me, especially, and I know you are keenly tuned into this. We've had roughly almost 9 months of mortgage rates moving between 6 and 7%, 6.3, 6.5, 6.4. So bouncing around that. In a sense, what it's telling me is buyers are coming to terms, number one, with the fact that rates are no longer going to be 3% anytime soon. So they're beginning to look at how they can enter this market rather than, can I enter this market? And specifically, when I look at March, at the traffic data, and what I show you here are March for the last roughly 7 years, so 2017, 18, 19, all the way through March of this year. What you see is that the index, showing time index at 223.9 for this March, is slightly below the last 2 years, the pandemic years. But let's be honest, that should not be a surprise to anyone, right? Those were highly unusual years. And in fact, comparing almost anything to the pandemic years is going to show a real divergence. I mean, whether it's employment, whether it's the economy, whether it's mortgage rate, everything is going to be very different, in part because pandemic years, by and large, are going to be in many ways almost like unicorns, right? Highly unlikely events, or very rare. What stands out to me, however, when you compare March of 2023 with the Marches of 2017, 18, 19, what you see is that buyer traffic is already above pre-pandemic levels. So if anything, this data point highlights for me that demand for housing, contrary to expectations over the last half a year or so, is really coming in as expected for the season, ramping up even more so than in pre-pandemic years. And when I take a look at where we see a lot of this traffic, what you see here are the four major regions of the country. And you see that the relatively more affordable Midwest and Northeast are really leading a lot of this buyer demand in terms of traffic. The slightly more expensive West Coast regions and even the South, and we've seen a lot of demand, a lot of associated price increases in both of these regions over the last 2 years, are taking a backseat in March. But Midwest, Northeast, solid gain in buyer traffic. So with that up front, the next question for me really was, what is driving this solid home buying interest in the spring of this year? And to answer that question, I really thought, well, what does generally underpin and drive a lot of real estate activity? By and large, it tends to be the jobs market. So I took a look at the job market numbers. And in essence, what I find is basically we're having a strong job market underpinning very solid housing traffic. And to highlight just a few data points for you this morning, I'll start with the payroll employment numbers from April. And it's important to put this into perspective. Number one, April numbers were much stronger than March. Number two, and I think very important to remember, most economists and even in newspapers combining economic forecasts expected about 180,000 jobs to be created in April, sort of a little bit faster than March, but not by much. Instead, the numbers were a real surprise. In fact, we had 253,000 new jobs created in the economy, which really outpaced a lot of market expectations. And for some, it pointed to the fact that the Federal Reserve may still feel pressed to push rate hikes through the rest of the year to combat inflation. But that aside, to me, as an economist, the good news for housing is, as long as Americans have jobs, we're likely to have a much stronger housing market. And when I look at where those jobs were created, what stands out to me, every industry except for wholesale trade saw solid employment gains, whether it's the hospitality and leisure, so restaurants, bars, hotels, convention centers. Business is back and it's growing, which is wonderful for the jobs. At the same time, business, professional services, financial services, when you're looking at healthcare, education, manufacturing, even construction, saw job growth in April, all of them pointing towards an economy that remains resilient, even as a lot of financial market analysts and generally investment folks continue to fret over a recession driven obviously by the monetary tightening we've seen from the Fed. The recession is not out of the question, but you may remember from last week, I mentioned to you, we've spent the last 8 months worrying about a recession, and with every month looking at the incoming data and saying, so far, we're not seeing signs in the economy of a recession. And even for housing, these trends have basically pointed to a return towards a seasonal normal. Importantly for me on the labor data, what I also saw in April was the unemployment rate dropped to the lowest level in about 50 years. Last time the unemployment rate was at 3.4%. I really had to look back in the history of the data. It was May of 1969. Decidedly a very different time in the US. I think the music to some people was quite exciting and happening. The fashion trends were different, and so were the real estate markets. That being said, a 3.4% unemployment rate is really solid and well below the average that we've seen over the 1948 to 2023 timeframe. So by and large, a very solid month. And importantly, and here's what I pay close attention every month, I look at wages. What are wages doing? Because in an environment as we've collectively been experiencing, in which prices for everything from bread, milk, eggs, daycare, dry cleaning, lunch, you name it, has been rising, and then you overlay that with mortgage rates that have been rising, home prices that remain relatively high, for a lot of home buyers, it's been a very crunch time period. When I look at April's wage growth, first of all, what stands out is wages have grown, really important. Number two, they have grown by 4.4%, which outpaces the average for the 2010-2023 period, which was only about 3%. What that tells me is that for many Americans, this wage growth, which again is way better than we've seen in decades, is a real silver lining to the challenges we're experiencing, because in a sense, it gives people the ability to make up for some of the pressure that they felt from inflation, from higher living costs. And to me, that's a real silver lining and something that, again, I pay attention to every single month. So what do these trends, when looked from a larger perspective, really mean for you, right? We are in the market every day. You're working with homeowners. You're working with buyers. You're trying to help them make decisions that for many of them are some of the most important decisions of their life, right? When it comes to either making the biggest purchase of their life or selling to buy another home or selling to retire, whatever it is, you want to know, what does this mean for me? What does this mean for my clients? Here's my big takeaway for this week. Number one, the spring housing market so far has been outpacing expectations. And this to me is such a bit of good news. It may be really an understatement in some ways, and it may sound a little soft, but the point is we've spent 8 months worrying about a market that might be frozen come springtime. And what we're seeing is, importantly, rising wages have been boosting many Americans' confidence and making them feel better about the current environment. We're not fully out of the woods with inflation, but with higher wages, with a solid job market, people feel more confident. Number two, with job market growing, demand for homes is stronger than expected this spring. And if anything, I see this as a real opportunity for homeowners who also got cold feet over the last 8 months, and we've seen new listings decline significantly, to understand that this market is not the terrible market that has been forecasted. And in fact, for many homeowners, current market conditions, if they are ready to move to their next location, might actually help them sell their home at a really good price. And number three, while new listings continue to lag and inventory remains tight, and I know for many of you, right, the mantra is just, give me a house and I'll sell it. I have plenty of buyers. The good news is the spring market is already an active market. The important thing, I think, to remember, and you know this firsthand, geographic differentiation matters, as all real estate markets are local. What we're seeing this spring is more of a divergence between markets that are affordable and performing very well, and some markets which are still contending with higher prices, or markets which saw a real surge in prices during the pandemic, where people are taking a slight step back and taking a breather. But by and large, I'm really encouraged by the data. And with every week, every month, we continue to pay attention at Keeping It Matters at the data. What does the data tell us in terms of what's happening in the economy, what's happening in the market? Because beyond that, right, we have the headlines to contain. And as you know firsthand, if you see in the headlines, dog bites person, it doesn't generate nearly the traction that a headline saying person bites dog would generate, right? So a lot of headlines are driving concern, mostly because it's good for clicks. And the one thing I want to encourage you to do this morning as well, we have put together some visuals, called them top 5 visual graphics that explain the market. And you see the link on your screen, trykcm.com visuals. We hope that these might be compelling for you and your clients and encourage you to use them. So with that, I conclude my remarks and glad to take any questions that you might have.
I know we had one question from Mike who asked about were the numbers on the showing time graph in thousands? And I had asked him to specify which graph he was talking about. So we'll see if he responds, but nothing else as of yet.
No worries. Yeah, absolutely. I'm actually glad to answer Mike's question. The numbers on the graph tend to be index values. So showing time creates an index of activity. And you'll see in the slide, if you download them, we have links to where the numbers come from. So you can actually look at a lot more detail in the reports that showing time puts together. So you'll find that in the slides. If you like to do a little more digging or dive deeper. But yes, those values tend to be index values and they fluctuate month to month. So as I said, you can find more information. And if you have any questions, glad to dig along with you. Well, I'm so glad you joined us this morning. I wish you a fantastic week ahead, and I hope it is a real pleasant one wherever you are. Thank you so much, and we'll see you on the next deep dive.